We're joined with Carl Jha. Carl Jha is a host of Silk and Steel podcast focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. Carl, welcome back, man. How you doing today? I was having this conversation with Mark that is a little disturbing, to put it mildly. In fact, I suspect that all of the conversations I have this morning are going to be disturbing. And invariably, there seems to be an escalatory spiral that's taking place. In real terms, the US, UK, and France have declared war on Russia. They may not have necessarily drawn out documents, but from the standpoint of crossing red lines, they have definitely crossed those red lines, and they have full and perfect knowledge that Russia is serious. The Oresnik missile that was fired on Ukraine, like I keep saying, a weapon of devastating power that can hit anywhere in Europe. They were trying to demonstrate, stop. We are serious. We're not screwing around. Stop now. And instead of taking that with the seriousness that it demanded, they have decided to think of this in terms of, yeah, but Putin really is bluffing. He's just doing that to Ukraine. And that there have been conversations about putting nukes in Ukraine, about putting JSONs in Ukraine or giving them to Ukraine. There's even been talk about putting troops from Europe into Ukraine. Like, all of this stuff is just astonishingly deranged. And yet this is the delusion that they're going in. The reason why I wanted to bring you on is because, from my point of view, Russia is not fighting any global war alone. At the point where hostilities kick off in real direct terms, I strongly suspect that the relationship between China, the relationship between Iran, the relationship between North Korea will all immediately come into play, especially considering that there have been security agreements between Iran and North Korea. And even though it may not necessarily be stated, Russia and China have had military exercises going back for years at this point. Do you see China getting involved in any kind of conflict that kicks off with Russia? Give me your thoughts on this. What are your thoughts?
Well, right now, I think Russia can handle everything by itself. I mean, the Ukrainian battlefield is going their way. In fact,
yes,
the reason the US and NATO is escalating at this particular juncture is because they're trying to make a lemonade right now of a lemon. That's Ukrainian war. And I still think this is like the dark branded moment where Biden is setting up Trump to fail. Just before Trump takes office, he's gonna crank up the war to another, to 11. So there's no way that Trump can have any possibility of making peace. This is why they.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And this is why Biden authorized long strike missile attack deeper into Russia. This is why they're talking about returning nuclear weapons that was taken away from Ukraine after Cold War. And they are doing everything possible to provoke Russia. And Russia has responded. Russia sent a very clear signal. Look, we have this thing called Oresnik missiles, and it reaches hypersonic speed when it hits a target, and you have nothing in your system that can intercept a ballistic missile coming at you at hypersonic speed.
Yeah.
So it's a signal to US to stop this foolishness. But Biden and his team decide, you know what, this is how we like it to play. We'd like to escalate even further. We want to have it more. We want to put more fire. I mean, for Biden, he's going out in a blaze.
Yeah, but he's going to take the world with him, which is the problem, because there's no other room, meaning there's no room to escalate in this. Like, any escalation at this point is a breach of a red line. And the fact that Putin launched that Oresnik missile, he even in his statement, he made it clear, you will be fair game, meaning all of you are legitimate targets since you are firing missiles into Russia. And by the way, even in that statement that he gave, when he gave the speech, what's wild about it, Putin has come out and gave a speech to his people. Kamala Harris is on vacation in Hawaii. Joe Biden has not been seen. Like, think about that. Like Joe Biden is making decisions behind the scenes that is dragging this country into a third world war, and he has not addressed the nation. He has not said anything to the American public, and there have not been any real questions asked about, hey, Putin says that, he may hit bases in Europe. What do you have to say about that, Joe Biden? Nothing. Like, it's astonishing. I've never seen anything like it. I guess my thing is, even in that speech, though, he noted China. He was talking about that the US and Europe were moving weapon systems also with this idea of countering China. In the speech that he was talking about with Russia, meaning even in his speech, he linked China and Russia together. So it's like, yeah, Russia can win a conventional war, but I get the sense that at the point where NATO troops are getting killed and they lose that conventional war, that it may go nuclear. And I would imagine the countries will have to, please. No, go
everything, right now, Washington justifies everything as countering in China. Like even Ukraine war, they say, well, we have to win on the battle of Ukraine, so China don't have second thoughts about Taiwan.
Yep.
But they're losing in Ukraine. Taiwan can see Ukraine is getting wrecked. And there's no way China is going to let Russia fail. I mean, China understands perfectly. First, the West aim to take down Russia, and then China is next.
Yeah.
And so it would be crazy for China to help the West to take down Russia so they can take down China next.
Under Joe Biden, the world has become vastly more dangerous. And there is no greater danger than the deadly menace of nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles. Hypersonic missiles move at many times the speed of sound and 6 times faster than current missiles. Armed with nuclear weapons, they could annihilate entire cities and even countries within minutes. And we cannot let this happen. If you take a look right now, the nuclear word is being mentioned all the time. This is a word that you're not allowed to use. It was never used during the Trump administration, but now other countries are using that word against us because they have no respect for our leadership. World War III would be a catastrophe unlike any other. This would make World War I and World War II like very small battles. The best way to ensure that such a conflict never happens is to be prepared with unmatched technology and unrivaled strength. To this end, when I'm commander-in-chief, which we did an awfully good job at rebuilding our military, we rebuilt the entire military. Once again, I will work with Congress and our great military leaders, not the ones you see on television. I don't consider them leaders. But we're going to work with them to build a state-of-the-art, next-generation missile defense shield.
First part of that speech was great. Second part of that speech is terrifying because, again, it's hubristic. It's this idea that Donald Trump is going to come in and he's going to do what? What assets does he have on the ground that could change the context of the war? None. Zero. And Russia, at this point, is not necessarily going to make any deals or agreements in the way that the Minsk agreements were made. This is a conflict that they want to end and settle for good. And part of settling this for good is the decimation of NATO, meaning NATO ceased to be a viable entity if it loses in Ukraine. Here we are. We're back with Carl. Welcome back, Carl. Like I say, I'm freaked out by this because they during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had leaders like Kennedy, Khrushchev that had the capability of making a deal, had good sense. They were very competent. And Kennedy was even pushing back against his generals. I mean, his generals were making this argument that, hey, we can destroy the Soviet Union and we'd only lose the East Coast. And I said, what? What do you mean we'll only lose the East Coast? What the hell are you talking about? And Kennedy thought they were fundamentally crazy. And so you had a president at that point that was willing to exert a certain amount of power against the generals and against even the CIA and some of these intelligence operations, and be willing to make a deal. And you had the same thing in Russia where you had hardliners. I don't think people realize this. 2 letters were sent to Kennedy. The first letter was panicky the people were somewhat freaked out, and they were looking for a deal and looking for a way to end it because they knew it was going to nuclear conflict. The second letter were the hardliners, basically telling them to F off and that they were willing to have a war. Kennedy had sense enough to look at the first letter and only regard the first letter and pretend like the second one didn't even come, meaning he was willing to make some kind of agreement. And there was at least a certain amount of respect between the Soviet Union and the US, despite the fact that they were in a Cold War, that is not here today. They don't seem to have it today in the same way that they had it back then. And so, yeah, it freaks me out. It gives me great qualms and concerns. And I don't believe for one moment, and I don't think the US believes for one moment, that a war against Russia is only a war against Russia. In fact, our nuclear doctrine even brings up that we are in an area where we may be outmatched by more than one peer competitor, meaning Russia and China, and that we may have to strike first, meaning a first nuclear strike, which is astonishing when you think about it. But this is the stuff that these guys are talking about. These are the war plans that these guys are making, knowing, or at the very least having some recognition that China and Russia have evolved and evolved significantly so. How is China dealing with this, by the way? I'm sorry, please, give me your take. But
I mean, this is nothing new, but people today probably don't realize how close we were to a nuclear annihilation. Just like you mentioned, the Kennedy showed excellent leadership by backing down, by holding his people in check, because everyone was ready to go. Everyone was ready to have a nuclear Armageddon. And Kennedy's like, no, you're crazy. We don't need to do that. I mean, the Soviets Soviets are people too. And now we don't have someone like JFK at the helm, because he probably got killed by CIA. I think he got killed by.
A lot of people think that. I mean, even the Oliver Stone thing pointed out that they think he was killed. In fact, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., like if you ever hear him talk about it, he talks about it within that context. I think he believes it too, that the CIA basically had him whacked. I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
And we don't have JFK now. Okay, we had Biden. We had Biden. I mean,
who's so out of his mind that couldn't even run for office, like that his own party cannibalized, ate him alive to get him out the race.
So the U.S. empire is autopilot right now. I mean, if this was back in the Cuban Missile Crisis, that autopilot would have been launching of missiles. So right now we're not even sure who is at the helm, who has a nuclear code at this point, especially when there talks about, when Biden was telling Xi, we're not going to have AI to control nuclear launch. Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about?
They're having this conversation about AI launching nukes. And it's like, what? Where the hell did this conversation come from? How is China looking at this? I am super curious about that. Like, because from the Chinese point of view, they have tried to be peacemakers. They've tried to bring the world together. I mean, they've used peace as a weapon of sorts. I guess they've recognized that the U.S. has been using proxies as a means of undercutting governments. And I guess China has looked at it as, okay, well, peace is the most viable pathway to have a world without this kind of hegemonic control. But they have to see that this is on an escalatory spiral. They have to see it. Well, what are they thinking in this moment?
Well, okay, China, this is nothing new to China, because China has been under nuclear threat from United States since 1945, since the founding of PRC. Like immediately next year in 1950, during Korean War, MacArthur wanted to turn Manchuria into a nuclear radioactive lake, right? And of course,
Eisenhower fired him though. Again, this was when presidents would fire their generals.
Truman fired him. Yes. But MacArthur is still some kind of hero to the U.S. right wing to this day, right? Because he's crazy.
Iconic, yeah.
But that was not the only instance when U.S. threatened to use nuke against China. U.S. also threatened to nukes against China in 1958, second Taiwan Strait crisis. At that time, they planned. There was a plan from Pentagon to use nuke against mainland China if the Chinese People's Liberation Army had taken a small offshore island of Kinmen. That's like couple kilometers away from the Chinese coast. If China had done that, had landed, and they would have used nukes. And we only find out about this like very recently when Daniel Ellsberg leaked it. You know, like very recently.
Pentagon papers,
and that's how close. And I think China was even back then. That's because China didn't have nukes of their own. So this is why U.S. can talk about using nukes against China without impunity. But they backed down from the 1958 plan because they thought that might incur Soviet nuclear retaliation.
Right.
So they backed off. But this is why when Mao, at that time, Mao used to say, well, okay, if this nuclear war that they want, that's fine. Let's bring it on. Let's have it. There's plenty of Chinese population. We're still gonna have 300 million people left afterwards, but you will have none. And people always think, okay, Mao is crazy, right? He's just taking this crazy talk to another notch. But in fact, now from what we know about U.S. nuclear plan, at that time, the U.S. nuclear plan calls for strike on both China and Soviet Union.
Right.
If U.S. were to have a nuclear exchange with Soviet, but China didn't join in, but they want to destroy China just so there will not be a third power standing after U.S. and Soviet were destroyed. So, but then pretty soon they realized, oh, there's a diminishing return of nukes on China because at that time China was not industrialized. So most of the people live in the countryside, in the rural areas, and the U.S. will essentially run out of target because like after they've taken out all the big cities, there's still the bulk of the Chinese population still live very spread out in the countryside. They at that time they don't have the power to completely nuke the entire continental China. So. This is why now, this is why China went nuclear in 1964. That's in the first place. And then now, so China has a sizable but small nuclear arsenal. They have maintained about the same size for decades because China's nuclear arsenal is as a deterrent, and they feel like if they possess the capability to create enough hurt, that will create enough deterrent from the United States thinking of doing something foolish. But now,
I'm glad you mentioned that because there's a report out that China has tripled the amount of uranium that is coming in from Russia on this. Is that a coincidence?
No, because now with all these crazy talks coming from U.S., China is realizing, okay, maybe 300 nukes is not enough. maybe 300, 400 maybe is not enough. Maybe we need to have reach parity with United States. So that means they're on plan to expand their nuclear arsenal probably to 1,000 or 1,500. Like one reason China had kind of froze its nuclear arsenal size for decades is because China was concentrating on developing its economy. It didn't want to develop precious economic resources to develop nuclear weapons. But now, when the Chinese economy has been developed, China has industrialized. Now China got to protect what it has, and in order to protect it against crazy maniacs running in Washington, now they're like, okay, maybe it makes sense to expand their nuclear arsenal. So China is expanding, is secretly expanding its nuclear arsenal. This is according to U.S. intelligence estimate, which you should always take with a large grain of salt. So China, but their estimate is China is on its way to expand from 300 or 400 nukes they have now to about 1,000 and 1,500 in the future. and then this way they will reach a somewhat parity with United States, because U.S. have about a couple thousand nukes, active nukes, and so this is why now Pentagon is saying, whoa, we can't have that. We can't have China reach parity with us. We must upgrade our own nuclear program. This is why Pentagon back in 2022, they came up with a nuclear proposal to upgrade a nuclear arsenal in the United States. And it's a very comprehensive list. They're going to upgrade the stealth bombers. They're going to upgrade the nuclear submarines. They're going to upgrade the rockets. So altogether, it's only going to cost $1 trillion with a T.
Yeah.
But now, recently, they went back to Congress like, reviewing what we know, that's not going to be enough. We need more. So it's going to be about $1.5 trillion now.
Well,
So
as I was telling the audience, they also changed the nuclear strike posture. Like, for the first time, we changed it to first strike under this idea that, China and Russia are going to be working together. And that because they may be working together, this will be an overwhelming competitor. And so we reserve the right to hit first both, which is, again, like, this conversation is rather astonishing. And I don't think it's almost like we're having this conversation about the end of the world. And they are having this conversation seriously about the end of the world. And it doesn't seem like it registered to them that it's the end of the world. It is super bizarre to me. Like, I don't quite get it. And I can't imagine what Putin, or for that matter, Xi Jinping, is thinking to themselves, like, they're going to end the world. They're hell bent on it.
This is American exceptionalism on steroids,
on
radioactive steroids. I mean, because they really, I mean, like, when people talking about escalating versus either Russia or versus China, the underlying premise is they're thinking they're not going to get hit back. They're thinking, okay, we're going to create trouble in their backyard. We are going to have wars in their periphery, on their borders, but we will be safe and sound here in Washington. This is why Putin sent a very clear signal by launching that Oresnik missiles. It's like, hey, look, we have these missiles that can travel at hypersonic speed, and you have nothing to counter it. And we have the capability. We just choose where to use it, and you should remember that.
Yeah, I want to play this clip. This is a rear admiral, and they asked him after the Oresnik hit, effectively, like, listen to what he says, because they're asking him about a nuclear war potentially, basically this escalatory spiral. And again, these missiles are not just aimed at Russia, they're also aimed at China, which was something that Putin mentioned in his speech. And we know for a while now that working with Japan, the Philippines, they're looking for a way to basically, quote unquote, counter China and to try to get the similar fait accompli on China as they did on Russia. I would point out something different, though. One of the things that the hypersonic missile made clear, either whether China uses it or Russia uses it, is that aircraft carriers are vulnerable. So, this idea of trying to get an aircraft carrier closer to China, okay, well, that seems like a fail at this point with these weapons, where there's no way to knock these weapons down. But listen to what this guy says about winning a nuclear war, or this idea that the U.S. Will engage in a nuclear war if it believes that it can remain supreme at the end of that war, which is just, again, outlandish.
Talk about non-nuclear and nuclear capabilities. We certainly don't want to have an exchange, right? I think everybody would agree. If we have to have an exchange, then we want to do it in terms that are most acceptable to the United States. So it's terms that are most acceptable to the United States that puts us in a position to continue to lead the world.
terms that are he is talking about a nuclear war, and he is saying, yeah, if we have a nuclear war, we need to make sure that we can continue to lead the world after. That is mind-blowing. Like, that is a mind-blowing statement that he is sitting there having. And I keep thinking to myself, dude, do you know what you're saying? How do you plan to win a nuclear war? It's outrageous.
This is why I have been a long-term fan of the game Fallout series. You know, the premise of that game is that U.S. and China is going to fight a great war, and there's going to be a nuclear exchange. But U.S. government planned for it by digging these nuclear shelters where they try to hide out to survive the end of humanity. I mean,
crawl out to the fallout, baby, when they drop that bomb. That game is fantastic, by the way. I agree with you. That game is awesome. The soundtrack,
and the TV series.
Oh,
the
TV
soundtrack
series
is
so
great.
good. The soundtrack is so good.
But
people like this are terrifying.
The great thing about the game is it totally makes fun of the kind of the mentality that's rampant in the U.S. government, and here we are, where we're in 2024, we're watching this unfolding in our eyes, and it's again, it's like this is not reality for them. They are still playing. So everything is a game for them. It's a game, you know, like everything is a mental exercise. They're literally just doing mental masturbation, you know, for a job, and how nobody has said, wait, how about we don't have a nuclear war?
Right? Because he's like, well, we don't really want one, but if we need to have one, as long as we can maintain control, fair enough. And it's like, dude, what the hell are you talking about? As long, like, he's acting as if, because he went further. He has more to say in that speech where he's talking about, like, we need to maintain force and reserve. So, like, after an exchange, we need to make sure we have additional nuclear weapons in case we need to fire more nuclear weapons. And assume for the moment that he does that. So what is he thinking? He's going to have a nuclear exchange with Russia. Russia is obviously has a dead man, you know, the dead hand. Basically, if the war takes place, the missiles will fire either way.
Russia actually has more nukes than United States. Also,
yes, they do.
Currently. They have more active nukes than United States. And but the U.S. nuclear doctrine always calls for dual strike against both Russia and China, because U.S. do not want a third power to remain dominant.
Which is why I bring up China. It's exactly why I bring up China. Because under that model, let's say that they have an exchange with Russia. Okay, well, you can't remain in charge if China is going to be left untouched. I mean, this was the whole thing with World War II, right? The U.S. was untouched by that war. Everything else was destroyed. And so the U.S. became the world leader of everything because we weren't hit. Like, you know, Pearl Harbor. But that's Pearl Harbor in comparison to everything in Europe being destroyed, everything in Korea being destroyed, everything in China and Japan being, or Japan anyway, being destroyed. So there's no way that they can think, well, we're going to retain control of the globe while leaving China untouched after we have a nuclear exchange with Russia. It can't work that way in their minds. China would, by definition, almost have to be hit at the exact same time they launch at Russia. Like, this is outrageous that they're saying this stuff. And that's what I mean when I'm saying China has to be thinking about this. Like, whatever escalation that takes place with Russia, almost by definition, is an escalation that also takes place with China, whether China is directly involved or not. Or do they see it that way?
Well, I mean, this is why China is expanding its nukes, nuke arsenal. I mean, they're preparing. They're preparing also. Like, okay, so looks like U.S. is not being deterred by our 300 nukes. So maybe they will be deterred by 1,000 nukes.
They're not deterred by Russia's 2,000 nukes. Like, China could have 1 billion nukes. I don't think they're going to be deterred by it. Like you said, Russia has nuclear parity with the U.S. Like, if I'm not mistaken, they may even have more nukes than the U.S.
More.
They're not deterred. They don't seem to be deterred.
Wow. I mean, the problem, like as Putin said, it's a U.S. mentality of
It is.
the hegemonic mentality of how U.S. got to be the top dog all over the war.
I had such personal relationship with Trump as well. It is not about the personality of the leader, it is about the elite's mindset. If the idea of domination at any cost, based also on forceful actions, dominates the American society, nothing will change. It will only get worse.
Well, you heard him even in that speech. We have to remain at the top, even in the case of a nuclear war, which is just astonishing. By the way,
after nuclear war,
right after nuclear war, we need to maintain hegemonic control. Like that, even then, that's on his mind, right? Like it's like even in the case of a nuclear obliteration of the globe, we must have one last American standing. Oh, by the way, there was something else that happened with China. So apparently, China found, what was it, $90 billion in gold? Did I get that right?
So China is already the world's largest gold producer. And they just literally struck gold mine. and so I think they found a reserve that's about 1,000 metric tons of gold, which is a lot of gold. and gold is going to go up, right? I mean, the way that U.S. is printing money like crazy. I mean, they're not even printing money anymore. They don't need to print money on paper. They're just like digitally adding a couple of zeros. so I mean, gold is going to be all the commodities going to be more valuable. And it's that's just going to so China is hedging right now. This is why China is hedging against all the U.S. craziness, including how U.S. is monetizing dollar hegemony as a weapon. So recently, China has offered dollar-denominated bonds in Saudi Arabia. So, like, people are like, wait, what the hell is China doing? China already holds a lot of dollars. Saudi Arabia is holding a lot of dollars. So why is China selling bonds in Saudi Arabia? Well, it actually makes sense if you think about it, because the whole U.S. financial hegemony rests on the dollar hegemony, and it rests on petrodollar, because back in the 70s, Kissinger traveled to Saudi Arabia. It's like, okay, we're going to move off the gold standard completely, but we need to back our money on something. So we're gonna tie dollar and oil together. So you're going to make sure when you sell people oil, they will have to pay in U.S. dollars. And that's the birth of the petrodollar. So anyone in the world right now, they need to import energy. They need to buy energy. They have to spend dollars. And all these Gulf monarchies, they're finding themselves they find themselves end up with an influx with a lot of more dollars than they know what to do with. So what do? Well, they invest in United States, whether real estate, stocks, or U.S. treasuries. And so that. and then back when U.S. still had manufacturing, then they will U.S. will sell Saudi manufactured goods, weapons, etc. to recycle that dollars back into the U.S. economy. That's how it used to work, right? Right now, U.S. strategy is, you know what? I'm gonna bomb. I'm gonna create this. I'm going to light fire all across the globe. I'm going to touch a war in Europe, in Ukraine. I'm going to support Israel to destabilize Middle East. So nowhere is safe to park your money except in United States, except park your dollars in U.S. Treasury. And that way you can be used to continue to finance the U.S. military spending, right? It's a perfect scheme. So, China realized what's going on. That's why they have been reducing their treasury holdings, from one-time high of 1.4 trillion. Now it's down to about 700 billion, I believe. And,
really? They've gotten rid of that much of the dollar.
The treasury. So, but they still have a lot of dollars. right? So
Yeah.
they're not buying you. They're getting these. China's getting the dollar from their trade surplus, which is priced in dollars. So they're like, okay, we don't want to park our money in treasury where United States government can just seize our money in the way they seize Russia's money. So they are investing those dollars in Belt and Roads projects. They're using those dollars to finance the building infrastructure, building ports in much of the global south. And what now with their Chinese bond offering in dollars, they are getting the same rate as United States government. So which means Chinese government now can borrow money in dollars at the same rate as the United States government. Think about that, right? So US. So one of the advantage of US before is it can borrow, it can continually borrow money, and people will put their money into the US Treasury bill because it's safe. But now China can borrow money at the same rate as the United States government, and they only did it it's an experiment, so they only offered $2 billion, right? $2 billion, but then it was oversubscribed 22 times. So that's how much demand it is for China issued dollar bonds. So there's a lot of Saudi prince sitting on mountains of US dollars. They want to park somewhere else other than US Treasury bills because they also go ahead.
Donald Trump is coming in and he seems to be hell-bent on China. I mean, is China concerned that they would do something similar to them as they did to Russia, basically stealing $300 billion, or what they did to Venezuela, where they stole all of that gold? I mean, for China to have that much dollars, doesn't it make them vulnerable on some level to the same tactics that were used against Russia? Or am I wrong?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, they still need goods from China. I mean, as much decoupling you want from China, you can't decouple everything. They still, like, even Raytheon Martin, even Raytheon and Lockheed Martin has said, we can't completely decouple from China because we need rare earth from China, and so that's unrealistic to have a completely decoupling break with in the trade ties. But China they don't expect ties getting better, so they're hedging. I mean, they have been hedging for a long time, and this is why they're offering the dollar denominated bonds. So now instead of all the petrodollar flowing into U.S. Treasury, like what they used to do, what the U.S. economists call a virtuous cycle. Now some of those petrodollars can flow into China, and then China uses dollars to continue to invest in the global South countries, and so now you see like that. It's China is not de-dollarizing, right? China is re-dollarizing, but keeping dollar just as a means of payment, right? Rather than a means to finance U.S. military. and so this is like China is playing Go while U.S. is still playing with checkers. And so this is where I don't think, whatever. China is prepared. China is prepared for the coming of Donald Trump, and this is why they're building extensive ties with the global South. That they're expanding massively their footprint in investment in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. Now China's number one trading partner is no longer United States. It's ASEAN. It's ASEAN, really? Southeast Asia. Yes. And that ASEAN is a top export market now for China. So they are already like EVs, right? Like 100% or 300% tariffs on Chinese EV, whatever, which is prohibitive. there's no Chinese EV in the United States except that one Xiaomi SU7 that was imported by Ford CEO. Nobody can get a Chinese EV in United States. So instead, China is selling them like hotcakes in Latin America, in Southeast Asia. I'm waiting. I'm in Indonesia. I'm waiting for BYD to bring their latest entry level EV to Indonesia, because that thing only costs like between $9,000 to that thing only costs between $9,000 to $13,000. I mean, that's great value.
And
so I'm waiting for that.
Yeah. And see, that's the rub. We can't compete with that. Like the rules-based order, and the reason why we're changing the rules-based order, we can't compete with that. Like in the old days, when the U.S. thought, well, we have a higher manufacturing, we are better at producing and better at creating technology and everything else. I think you get a situation where China can build an electronic vehicle that will be built here for like $50,000. I think like Musk, the lowest aspect of Tesla might be like $40,000. And they are building a machine that's just as good, if not better, for $9,000 to $13,000. And I saw their manufacturing plants. The entire thing is automated. Like the entire thing is basically being built by machines where you can take out a lot of the human labor out of it. No wonder they can build them for that cost. That's why we don't see them here. We can't compete with those cars. I mean, it's astonishing. KJ, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy these conversations. You're very illuminating in these discussions, and you help give context to a lot of the stuff that's taking place around the world. Thank you for this. KJ, no. He is Silk and Steel Podcast. Well, he hosts of Silk and Steel Podcast, focused on China, surrounding regions, and the history, culture, and politics of China. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Zhao. You can follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk N, the letter N. And you can subscribe and support his podcast at patreon.com, Silk and Steel. Carl, thank you, man. Always appreciate these conversations.
Invite me back.
Have a good one, man. All